"I can assure you that the situation was quite dramatic," continued the man in the corner, whilst his funny, claw-like hands took up a bit of string with renewed feverishness. In answer to further questions from the magistrate, she declared that she had never seen the accused. He might have been the go-between, however, that she could not say. The letters she received were all typewritten, but signed Armand de la Tremouille, and certainly the signature was identical with that on the letters she used to receive from him years ago, all of which she had kept. "And did it never strike you," asked the magistrate with a smile, "that the letters you received might be forgeries?" "How could they be?" she replied decisively. "No one knew of my marriage to the Comte de la Tremouille, no one in England certainly. And, besides, if someone did know the Comte intimately enough to forge his handwriting and to blackmail me, why should that someone have waited all these years? I have been married 7 years, Your Honor." That was true enough, and there the matter rested as far as she was concerned. But the identity of Mr. Francis Morton's assailant had to be finally established, of course, before the prisoner was committed for trial. Dr. Mellish promised that Mr. Morton would be allowed to come to court for half an hour and identify the accused on the following day, and the case was adjourned until then. The accused was led away between 2 constables, bail being refused, and Brighton had perforce to moderate its impatience until the Wednesday. On that day the court was crowded to overflowing. Actors, playwrights, literary men of all sorts had fought for admission to study for themselves the various phases and faces in connection with the case. Mrs. Morton was not present when the prisoner, quiet and self-possessed, was brought in and placed in the dock. His solicitor was with him, and a sensational defense was expected. Presently there was a stir in the court, and that certain sound, half rustle, half sigh, which preludes an expected palpitating event. Mr. Morton, pale, thin, wearing yet in his hollow eyes the stamp of those 5 days of suffering, walked into court leaning on the arm of his doctor. Mrs. Morton was not with him. He was at once accommodated with a chair in the witness box, and the magistrate, after a few words of kindly sympathy, asked him if he had anything to add to his written statement. On Mr. Morton replying in the negative, the magistrate added, "And now, Mr. Morton, will you kindly look at the accused in the dock and tell me whether you recognize the person who took you to the room in Russell House and then assaulted you?" Slowly the sick man turned towards the prisoner and looked at him, then he shook his head and replied quietly, "No, sir, that certainly was not the man." "You are quite sure?" asked the magistrate in amazement, while the crowd literally gasped with wonder. "I swear it," asserted Mr. Morton. "Can you describe the man who assaulted you?" "Certainly. He was dark, of swarthy complexion, tall, thin, with bushy eyebrows and thick black hair and short beard. He spoke English with just the faintest suspicion of a foreign accent. The prisoner, as I told you before, was English in every feature. English in his ruddy complexion, and absolutely English in his speech." After that the case for the prosecution began to collapse. Everyone had expected a sensational defense, and Mr. Matthew Quiller, counsel for Skinner, fully justified all these expectations. He had no fewer than 4 witnesses present who swore positively that at 9:45 a.m. on the morning of Wednesday, March 17, the prisoner was in the express train leaving Brighton for Victoria. Not being endowed with the gift of being in 2 places at once, and Mr. Morton having added the whole weight of his own evidence in Mr. Edward Skinner's favor, that gentleman was once more remanded by the magistrate, pending further investigation by the police, bail being allowed this time and 2 sureties of £50 each.